This watch is too expensive for most of us mere mortals. For me, the review is almost like looking through the looking glass. At $60,000, this costs more than most cars. This is the Patek Philippe 5930G, white gold, world timer, chronograph, all tied up into one package. Today I'll be discussing this watch through the lens of someone who certainly can't afford it, about the way a watch like this is constructed, and how a few features surprised me, especially given the cost. The Patek Philippe 5930G is a remarkable timepiece that combines two of the brand's most iconic complications, world time function and a chronograph. It sounds simple, but it isn't. Ordinarily, these complications don't exist together. The 5930G features a stunning blue dial with a hand-applied guilloche pattern, creating a visually striking centerpiece. At 39.5mm wide and just under 12mm thick, the white gold case strikes an excellent balance between presence and wearability. The watch's design seamlessly integrates the world time and chronograph functions without appearing cluttered or overwhelming. Now, this watch features the in-house movement caliber CH28520HU. It's a reliable and well-engineered, but its complexity contributes to the steep price point. It's not a sports watch. It's not a watch you're going to wear out playing tennis or doing something like that. This is a dress watch, and most Pateks, especially at this price point, as you can expect, are dress watches. They're not designed to be worn in rugged environments. While the automatic movement is technically impressive, it's also true that servicing such a movement will be incredibly costly and time-consuming. But that isn't a surprise when you're buying a $60,000 watch. Now, there are three things that you can't fault Patek for, and this watch is an illustration of that. And then I'll get through some things that surprised me. The first, the design is often very well thought through when it comes to Patek. Now, when I say often very well thought through, we can have a whole side conversation later on the Cubitus. I know most people feel a certain way about that one. The second one that Patek always gets right is movement architecture, and that's because they attract some of the best engineers when it comes to a watch movement design. And while the basic stuff on movements are the same, like the gear ratios from fourth to fifth wheels, where the escapement's going to generally be, the balance architecture of what ratios you need, it's all simple math, geometry, and algebra. But in the end, the movement architecture is more about like where they can pack in things so that it's visually appealing at the same time. And that's where a watch like this does something great. You know, it's not just the finishing, which I'll talk about in a second, but where they place components in order to give you the best sort of view into the world of what's going on inside the watch. And then obviously on top of that, the third thing is the finishing. Now, Patek has always been very good when it comes to movement finishing. It's again, part of the thing that you're paying for at this ridiculous, crazy price point is that in the back, you're gonna have a watch that every single part is finished to a certain sort of level. Where they're gonna have snailing, they're gonna have perlage work, they're gonna have Côte de Genève, they're gonna have bevels or anglage work on each of those bridges. They're gonna have perfect slotting, they're gonna have syncing, and all this stuff I've actually covered in a different video. If you wanna look back, I have it up above, where I talk about movement finishing in general, what the words are that we use, and how you kind of can tell what you're looking at. But this watch is the epitome of Swiss movement finishing. It's very well decorated, very well made. But I'll tell you personally from wearing it, what's weird is when you're wearing a watch, as it gets more expensive, it doesn't feel that much more expensive, right? So you put on a watch that's, you know, let's say $6,000 and it feels like an expensive watch, especially if it's something that you obviously can't afford or is a luxury good for most of us. Like $6,000 is a lot of money. $10,000 is a lot of money. When you go from a $10,000 watch, like let's say a Submariner or what you can get resale for a Girard-Perregaux Laureato these days, you go from that and then you put on the Patek and the refinement comes in the smallest of details. And so it doesn't feel like the watch is that much nicer. It just feels like a nice watch. The general dial layout and design were really well executed, and the function of each of the components was really tactile. You know, operating the chronograph felt snappy and responsive. Again, as you would expect, right? And then even operating the world timer function, again, snappy, responsive, felt right. Didn't feel like there was anything I was pushing too hard or was cheap in any way. So what's really hard is quantifying the difference between a $10,000 and $60,000 watch. It certainly doesn't feel 6 times better. And the same could be said for $10,000 watches versus $1,000 watches. right? Like there are certainly a lot of fixed costs to get you to a watch. And then after that, you're really talking about the most minute incremental changes. And people argue with me that the finishing is not a minute change, and it's not. I get that. But it generally, as a feeling, is in a lot of ways. You know, it's refined down to the like tiniest little detail. And I feel like most watches go on a curve where as you spend more money, you get a nicer feeling to a certain point, and then you start to really taper off. And I think from especially the $15,000 to $60,000 mark, there isn't a huge difference in feeling between this Patek and watches I've worn or tried on that are generally in the lower, let's say lower teens or $10,000 to $11,000. Quick thank you to Moyer Fine Jewelers, Brian, Bill, Matt, and the team. They've always let me borrow a wide range of watches, including this Patek, in order to review it. They've always been great to work with. I just bought my last 2 watches there at Moyer, so if you're in the area or you're shopping online, check out Moyer. The design of the 5930G is understated, yet luxurious. That's typical of Patek's approach. See, they're often all about understated elegance. The timepiece is supposed to be appealing to those who appreciate subtlety over ostentation, which is very different, obviously, than something like a Richard Mille. Now, at around $60,000, the 5930G might seem steep, but within Patek's strategy of creating scarcity and value, because they don't produce that many watches, and therefore increase the value of each of those, or perceived value of each of those, the price reflects not just the cost of the materials, but the craftsmanship, and also the brand's heritage, and exclusivity. And exclusivity being the paramount portion there. While it's well made, that perceived value of exclusivity in the brand definitely helps elevate the price. However, it also plays into the criticism of Patek's pricing, where the value sometimes seems more about that exclusivity than its intrinsic worth. Now, given the current market where watches like the Nautilus or even newer models like the Aquanaut see significant price inflation on the secondary market, the 5930G might be seen as undervalued by some collectors. This perception, due to its less flashy appeal, its overall dressy nature, compared to sports models, which are really popular right now, speaks volumes about the shifting dynamics of luxury watch appreciation, from dress watches to sports watches. While all of this is true, the design and the finishing is all really well done, as can be expected for this amount of money, it does have notable downsides. The 5930G has very limited water resistance at only 30 meters. But Patek has recently reiterated that 30 meters really does mean 30 meters underwater on some of their newer watches. I don't know if that is the same for this specific watch. And I've actually proved in a couple videos where modern watches rated at certain water resistance need to actually meet that specific depth. So if you want to look, I have videos linked there. But let's be clear, the function of this watch is not why you buy this watch. You buy this watch because it's a Patek. You buy this watch because it looks cool. Just like you buy anything, any watch that I have, I buy because it gives me a feeling, it looks nice. And if you have the disposable income, I suppose this is just a different version of what we buy. Instead of a Tudor for someone who has 100 times my net worth, this might be some fun thing that he wears every so often. It's not a world I live in, but it's certainly a world that exists. Another drawback is actually within the rotor. I never handled a Patek until this. And what's wild is you assume that most watches get nicer and nicer and eliminate those minor refinement issues you have at the lower end. For example, a Valjoux 7750, when it rotates, you can hear the rotor. And there are some other watches, especially on the more affordable end, where you can hear the rotor spinning. In this specific watch, when I rotated it, I could hear the rotor inside the watch rotating. And I thought that that was something that was solved at like the $5,000 to $10,000 price range, where Tudors, I don't hear the rotor, or Omegas, I don't hear the rotor, or Rolex, I don't hear the rotor. But in this case, on this watch, I could hear the rotor. And that blew my mind, sort of. I didn't expect that out of something that cost this much money. I assumed every level of refinement had been done to give the wearer the perfect sort of experience. But it goes to show that, these little details can still be overlooked, and that a noisy rotor clearly isn't something that goes away the more money you spend. Now, perhaps the most significant drawback of this watch is its price. At $60,000 resale, it's prohibitively expensive for most people. And the premium, obviously, as we've stated, is not just on the functionality and the design of the movement and the finishing of the movement. This watch is aimed at a niche market, and its value largely lies in the Patek Philippe name at the top of the dial, the brand prestige, rather than purely functional considerations. And again, that is sort of expected, and that is the true for many of these watches. In summary, the 5930G is a finely crafted watch, make no doubt about that, but it comes with a high barrier to entry and a set of compromises that may make it impractical or not enjoyable for many potential wearers. But what do you guys think about this watch, about Patek Philippe in general, and about, I guess, the price range at how expensive these things can get? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.